Upon the late night of November 8th, 1992, Jerry and Ruth, a married couple, were on their way back home from a nightclub. At 1:15 a.m., they spotted a 1989 Burgundy Buick Somerset parked on the side of the road. The car was running with both the headlights and interior light turned on, yet there was no sign of anyone nearby. Jerry suggested investigating, but Ruth proposed driving 3 kilometers to the sheriff's office in Benton, Missouri, to report the situation. They followed Ruth's suggestion. Upon hearing their report, the sheriff's deputies went to the specified location near a local trailer park. They found no one outside, but upon inspecting the car, they discovered a wounded young woman inside. She was lying on her right side with her legs on the driver's seat, head on the passenger seat, and her left arm hanging down to the floor. The woman was dressed in a sweatshirt and partially undone jeans, with her shoes missing. Her face and head were covered in blood, and her rings were on the dashboard. Despite finding no wallet, the officers noticed shell casings, indicating foul play. They utilized flashlights to examine the bushes for any potential hiding individuals, but their search only revealed more blood, seemingly scattered everywhere. Simultaneously, a tall young man wearing a dark shirt and jeans entered the sheriff's office in Benton, Missouri. He approached the officer who was in the process of dispatching an ambulance to the crime scene. The officer immediately recognized him as one of the Abbott's sons, whose parents owned a 24-hour gas station, a trailer park, and several other businesses. The Abbott sons also worked at the gas station. Introducing himself as Matt Abbott, the young man mentioned that he resided in a trailer park near the highway and had noticed the Buick while driving by. Unlike Jerry and Ruth, he approached the vehicle and discovered the lifeless girl. Clearly shaken and on the verge of hysteria, the young man recounted his experience to the officer. The officer assured him that they would contact him later and instructed him to return home. The officer neglected to check his identification or gather initial statements. Although the small town of Benton had a population of only 600 people, and the sheriff's assistant may have never encountered a murder case before, this was just one of the many mistakes made by the police in this investigation. However, one sheriff's deputy remained at the crime scene, diligently working when he was interrupted. He noticed a car turning towards him from the nearby trailer park. A young man emerged from the vehicle. The officer perceived him to be Hispanic or Mexican, aged between 25 and 30, and speaking with a distinct accent. In broken English, the man explained that he was running out of gas. When the deputy pointed out the 24-hour gas station, the man returned to his car and departed. As the officer did not find the man suspicious, he did not record the license plate or request identification. This was something a more experienced officer might have done. Wasn't it peculiar that a stranger drove directly to the crime scene in the middle of the night? He may have witnessed something, and now his identity remains a mystery. However, the surprises of the night were far from over. Approximately 2 minutes later, at around 1:40 a.m., another vehicle replicated the same actions. It made a turn on the road before the trailer park and approached the officer. A tall young man wearing a light shirt and jeans emerged from the car. He claimed to be the one who discovered the victim in the vehicle and inquired about her condition. The officer questioned whether the young man had visited the sheriff's office to report the incident, to which he replied affirmatively. The officer radioed in and confirmed that the individual was Matt Abbott. He had indeed visited the sheriff's office and was instructed to return home and await further guidance, which he should adhere to. Shortly after, an ambulance arrived at the location. The medical professionals confirmed the victim's passing. County Sheriff Bill Farrell arrived by 12 p.m. By then, it was already established that the victim was 19-year-old Michelle Lawless. Sheriff Farrell was acquainted with the girl's parents and wished to personally inform them of her demise before proceeding with questioning the witnesses. Angela Michelle Lawless, who went by Michelle, had completed high school just a year prior and had commenced her studies at the university. She was pursuing a nursing degree and worked as a waitress in a nearby town. Despite her attempt to live independently, she continued to reside with her parents after her roommate backed out. Michelle was highly involved in various activities. She sang in the choir, was a scout, and engaged in multiple organizations. Additionally, she practiced martial arts and had achieved a green belt. Despite her small stature of 152 centimeters, she was a formidable opponent. It was evident that she fought for her life, trying to evade her attacker, but unfortunately, he caught up to her. The forensic pathologist confirmed that Michelle succumbed to 3 gunshot wounds to the head and back, inflicted by a .38 caliber automatic pistol. The assailant initiated the attack when Michelle was seated in the driver's seat, facing her killer, as deduced from the trajectory of the bullets and the body's position in the car. 2 more shots followed quickly. However, evidence indicated that the assault began earlier near the car with marks on the grass and a significant amount of blood suggesting a struggle. Michelle tried to escape but was brought back to the car by the killer, who then struck her head with a blunt object. Although these injuries were not fatal, they caused Michelle to lose a substantial amount of blood. Alcohol was present in her system, but within legal limits for driving. There were no signs of violence despite indications that she had been with a man that evening. Blood samples from 2 different types were found under her fingernails, with smeared fingerprints and 3 distinct palm prints on the car's body. The first suspect questioned by the sheriff and his assistant was Michelle's on and off boyfriend, Lam Leon, the last person to see her alive. Their relationship was complicated, as Michelle expressed deep love for him in her diary, hoping for more commitment. However, Leon was not ready for that level of commitment, leading to strained interactions between them. Despite their occasional meetings, the night of the incident involved them crossing paths multiple times before Michelle, intoxicated, visited Leon after his taekwondo training. They engaged in conversation, intimacy, and she left approximately an hour later. Leon disclosed another interesting detail. Michelle paused before leaving for home. Initially, she inquired about staying over at his place, but when he refused, she then asked for a ride home. This was uncharacteristic of her to ask for such favors. Subsequently, she hurriedly gathered her belongings and departed without properly fastening her jeans, holding her bra and shoes in hand. The timeline revealed that Michelle left at 12:45 a.m., and Jerry and Ruth discovered the car at 1:15 a.m., indicating that the crime took place within a 15-minute window, factoring in the 15-minute drive from her boyfriend's residence to the car's location. Although the boyfriend's family owned a gun, it was not the same caliber used in the murder. He cooperated with a car search and passed a polygraph test. The sheriff and his assistant then interviewed Michelle's close friends, Lesha Odell and Chantel Kreider, who corroborated Leon's story but mentioned a slightly different time frame. Michelle dropped Lissa off at midnight, and it only takes minutes to reach Leon's place, suggesting a possible confusion in the timeline. Michelle offered Lissa to stay over, but she declined due to work, leading Michelle to ask if she could stay at Lissa's, who refused due to renovations causing a paint smell in her room. Considering Michelle's reluctance to go home alone, it hints at her awareness of potential danger. The focus then shifted to Matt Abbott, the individual who discovered the victim's body. However, locating him proved challenging, as his father clarified that they had spoken with Mark, who lived in the nearby trailer park, not Matt. The intriguing aspect of the narrative lies in the fact that 23-year-old Matt and Mark are indistinguishable twins, yet they have successfully assumed each other's identities on numerous occasions. After considerable effort, law enforcement officers were finally able to contact Matt, who confirmed his presence at the sheriff's office. According to Matt's statement, he was on his way home in a black Chevrolet pickup at approximately 1:10 a.m. when he noticed a vehicle with its headlights on. As he approached the car, an individual hastily leaped into a nearby ditch. Unfortunately, Matt was unable to discern the person's appearance or provide a description. Furthermore, this mysterious individual was never mentioned in any subsequent statements made by Mark. Inside the vehicle, Matt observed a person and deduced, based on the rings adorning their hand, that it was a female. Initially assuming she had consumed excessive alcohol and fallen asleep, Matt extended his arm through the fully open window on the driver's side and lifted her. It was at this moment that he discovered the girl was drenched in blood, and her body had already grown cold, indicating her demise. Filled with fear, Matt promptly sought assistance from the police. Several peculiarities arose from Matt's account. Firstly, how was he able to see Michelle's rings when the authorities discovered them on the dashboard? Secondly, why did Matt perceive her body as cold when the subsequent officers described her skin as warm? Given the timeline, it appeared that she had been slain just prior to Matt's arrival, and her body had already cooled. Realizing that she was not merely intoxicated but deceased, Matt became frightened and sought help from the police. Thirdly, the car window was only partially open, making it physically impossible for Matt to enter and lift Michelle as he described. Lastly, why did he return to the scene of the crime, and how did he end up wearing a different shirt and driving a different vehicle? Could it be possible that it was not Mark, but his identical twin brother, Matt, involved in these events? Mark's recollection of the incident continued to evolve. Subsequently, he recollected that upon discovering Michelle's lifeless body, he didn't rush to the sheriff's office but opted to use a payphone in the store parking lot. He recounted that as he dialed 911, a man in a white car approached him. This individual, potentially of Spanish or Mexican descent, informed Mark that he was low on fuel and requested a ride to the gas station. Mark found this appeal to be peculiar. The stranger had his own vehicle, so why did he need a lift? Sensing unease, Mark got into his car and drove to the sheriff's office while the man continued conversing. The man's description matched the one who inquired about gasoline from the police officer at the crime scene. However, what stood out was that Mark only recalled this encounter after a private discussion with Sheriff Farrell. The background of Mark and Matt's family is noteworthy. They hailed from a prosperous and esteemed family in the town, and their viewpoints carried weight. The twins' father was acquainted with the sheriff and even contributed financially to his election campaign. Mark and Matt themselves were perceived as charismatic, jovial, and popular individuals. Nevertheless, by 1992, 23-year-old Mark and Matt had garnered a reputation not only as fun-loving guys, but also as troublemakers. They were entangled in alcohol, frequently drove under the influence, had a nonchalant attitude towards relationships, and were known to partake in theft for amusement. A mutual acquaintance even mentioned that the twins associated with genuinely unsavory characters like Mark's old pal, Kevin Williams, and wouldn't be shocked if they were involved in a homicide. Speculations swirled that they were not just users but also distributors of illegal substances. Furthermore, there were murmurs that the illicit drug trade had some connection to the trailer park near the crime scene. However, in 1992, these were merely speculations. Several weeks went by without any fresh evidence, arrests, or suspects until unexpectedly. After 4 months, in February 1993, a breakthrough emerged. 4 prisoners reported overhearing an 18-year-old boy, Joshua Keith, who had previously served time for a misdemeanor, confessing to the murder of Michelle. None of Michelle's acquaintances had ever heard of Joshua, but when Mark Abbott saw his photo, he recognized him as the pale, blue-eyed young man who had asked for a ride to the gas station in a white car. Mark described him as a Spanish or Mexican individual with a tan and an accent. When the police approached Joshua at his father's residence in Illinois, he denied any involvement in the crime and claimed to have no knowledge of Michelle or any motive to harm her. However, As the police's seriousness became apparent and Joshua faced the prospect of a trial, his family pooled together their resources to hire a more competent lawyer. This attorney spoke with the inmates who had accused Joshua and discovered that they had conspired against him, believing in his innocence and hoping to avoid conviction for their own crimes. While incarcerated, they recalled the Benton murder and decided to exploit it to their advantage. They fabricated a story accusing Joshua of committing the murder in the hopes that the prosecution would offer them reduced sentences. Nevertheless, even though 2 inmates later retracted their statements, 2 others stepped forward to take their place. As Joshua awaited trial in jail, his cellmates claimed that he had confessed to the murder, even alleging that he spoke about it in his sleep. Despite the questionable testimony of these inmates, the trial proceeded, and Joshua faced charges for Michelle Lawless murder. During the trial, the prosecutor attempted to convince the jurors that Joshua was a member of a dangerous street gang. Mark emerged as the star witness for the prosecution, identifying Joshua as the individual who had frightened him by requesting a ride to the gas station. However, the trial initially seemed promising for Joshua as his lawyer managed to establish that he could not have been present at the crime scene. On the evening of Michelle's murder, Joshua's cousin experienced an accident, prompting Joshua to immediately rush to check on his cousin's well-being. Given this circumstance, it would have been impossible for Joshua to visit his brother in Kankakee, Illinois at 11:30 p.m., and then cover a distance of nearly 600 kilometers in just 2 hours to commit a crime against a girl he didn't even know, as confirmed by Sheriff Farrell. Numerous witnesses corroborated Joshua's alibi, stating that he was with his brother during the time of the incident. Despite recently joining a street gang, Joshua was not known to be a violent individual, let alone a murderer. The defense had a strong case until an unexpected witness, Chantel Kreider, one of Michelle's closest friends, was called to testify by the prosecutor. Chantel claimed to have encountered the defendant at a Halloween party a week prior to Michelle's murder. According to her account, while they were inside the house using the bathroom, Joshua, whom she initially didn't recognize, approached them. He made unwelcome advances towards the girls, and upon rejection he became angry, insulted Michelle, and quickly left. Chantel mentioned that Joshua appeared heavily intoxicated at the time. As they were leaving the party around midnight, the same individual approached their car, forcefully grabbed the door handle, and demanded a ride. He persisted in yelling and clinging to the door until they drove away. During the court proceedings, Chantel directly pointed at Joshua, confidently identifying him as the person she encountered at the party. It is important to note that the only physical evidence against Joshua was the presence of blood on his jacket. The prosecution failed to provide any fingerprints or DNA evidence linking Joshua to the crime, and the blood type found under Michelle's fingernails did not match his. However, the jury reached a guilty verdict after 3 hours of deliberation, influenced by the questionable testimonies of inmates Mark and Chantel. Consequently, Joshua was convicted of second-degree murder and received a 60-year prison sentence. Following Joshua's conviction, multiple girls who were present at the Halloween party, including the hostess, contacted Josh's attorney to express their doubts about Chantel's testimony. They claimed that she either made a mistake or deliberately lied. To support their claims, they compiled a comprehensive guest list from the party, which clearly showed that Joshua was not among the attendees. Additionally, these girls witnessed Michelle and Chantel leaving the party together, and no one pursued them by holding onto their car door handle. Furthermore, the individual who insulted Michelle was not an unknown stranger. His name was Todd, and he bore no resemblance to Josh whatsoever. The guest list was handed over to Sheriff Farrell, but unfortunately it mysteriously disappeared, and no further investigation was initiated. As time passed, January 2006 arrived, and Sheriff Farrell, who had been in office for nearly 3 decades, was succeeded by Rick Walter. Rick Walter happened to be one of the officers who initially arrived at the scene of Michelle's murder. Throughout the course of the investigation, he had always been dissatisfied with the outcome of Michelle's case and Joshua Keezer's conviction due to the presence of unanswered and crucial questions. One of the main concerns was how Joshua could have traveled from Kankakee to Benton in such a short span of time, and what could have motivated him to kill Michelle. The motive of a girl's rejection at a party seemed feeble to justify a journey of almost 600 kilometers to track her down and commit murder a week later. The new sheriff firmly believed that even if Joshua was involved in the crime, there must be another motive at play, and it was highly likely that other individuals were involved as well. Therefore, upon assuming the role of sheriff, he discreetly made the decision to reopen the case. This choice was undoubtedly challenging both financially and ethically, as the case had been officially closed, and the presumed culprit was already behind bars. He attempted to proceed without attracting much attention, but his efforts were short-lived when, just a week later, a man named Kevin Williams, a friend of Mark Abbott, unexpectedly appeared in his office. The newly appointed sheriff had not yet compiled a list of potential suspects, but Kevin wasted no time in informing him that he believed himself to be the main suspect. However, Kevin had an alibi, his wife, who was his girlfriend at the time of Michelle's murder. They were together on that fateful evening. This encounter with Kevin only added to the growing suspicion surrounding Sheriff Farrell, especially since he had warned Kevin about his status as a suspect. Nonetheless, the investigation pressed on. To ensure impartiality, Sheriff Farrell enlisted the help of an investigator from another town to work on the case. Initially, as the investigator reviewed the evidence, it seemed as though Joshua had been rightfully convicted. However, the more he delved into the case materials, the more he realized that Joshua did not deserve to be in prison. Firstly, the inmates who had initially cast doubt on Joshua's innocence recanted their statements, revealing that they had only sought to strike a deal with the prosecutor in order to have their own sentences reduced. Additionally, a key prosecution witness, Chantel, admitted to lying on the witness stand at the behest of Sheriff Farrell. He had spent hours convincing her that linking Joshua to Michelle would be of great service to the investigation. Furthermore, the supposed blood found on Joshua's jacket turned out not to be blood at all, despite what the jurors had been led to believe. Finally, the testimonies of numerous witnesses indicated that Joshua had no connection to Michelle and was actually 600 kilometers away from her during both the murder and the Halloween party. Thanks to the efforts of the new sheriff, Joshua was granted the opportunity for a case review. All the evidence was presented to the judge, who had to decide whether a new trial was warranted. However, on February 17, 2009, the judge made an unprecedented decision. Instead of ordering a new trial, he declared Joshua innocent of Michelle's murder. Joshua had spent nearly 16 years, the prime years of his life, in the infamous Missouri prison known as The Walls. Although it is now closed, it was once a terrifying location known as 48 Bloody Acres in America. The vulnerable young man suffered repeated beatings there, ending up in the hospital multiple times. He even admitted that at times he wished he wouldn't wake up. After enduring 16 years of horror, he was finally released as an innocent man. While justice was served for Joshua, it was crucial to convict the actual killer, or killers, of Michelle. In 2009, the new sheriff decided to reevaluate Michelle's belongings for DNA evidence. 3 DNA samples were discovered on her sweatshirt, in areas where the attacker may have touched her, in addition to Michelle's own DNA. One of these samples matched Mark's DNA, partially corroborating his account of touching her left shoulder, although the DNA was found on the right side. Furthermore, DNA was found under Michelle's fingernails and on the inner side of her right arm. Her boyfriend's DNA was also found, but he openly admitted to being with her that night as they were lovers. In 2013, Michelle's body was exhumed for further DNA analysis, which could have been done at the time of her murder but was not. Unfortunately, the pathologist had washed the body and applied a substance that hindered DNA testing, resulting in inconclusive results. However, the samples are preserved in the laboratory for potential future examination as technology advances. As for Mark Abbott, who was the key prosecution witness in Joshua's trial, his involvement raises further questions. While the unjustly convicted young man remained incarcerated, numerous individuals reached out to the authorities with crucial information that implicated not Joshua, but rather other individuals. Mark Abbott, Matt Abbott, and their father, who were involved in a vast illegal substance trade network in Missouri. The sheriff appeared to possess more knowledge than he was willing to disclose. Following Joshua's trial, a significant operation was conducted, resulting in the arrest and interrogation of many individuals connected to this network. In 1997, the same year, Mark Abbott received a 20-year sentence for his involvement in illegal substances. He confessed to an officer during an interrogation that, on the night of Michelle's murder, he was in the company of his friend, Kevin Williams, who was responsible for shooting Michelle. According to Mark, Kevin and Michelle were romantically involved, and she had informed him that she was pregnant with his child. That evening, Kevin wanted to speak with her. They followed her car, and Mark signaled for her to stop by, flashing his headlights. However, the conversation took a turn for the worse. Kevin and Michelle argued, and Mark heard gunshots. Subsequently, Kevin fled towards the trailer park, while Mark went to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Farrell later denied having seen Mark's statements, but this was proven false, indicating that there was more to the story. Mark was not the sole witness linking Kevin to the crime scene. On the night of Michelle's murder, a man named Dallas Butler was riding his motorcycle to his mother's house in Mississippi. When his headlights illuminated a parked car in the darkness, he observed a woman slumped over the steering wheel and a man wearing a red cap standing beside the vehicle, partially leaning inside. The man instructed Dallas to continue on his way, assuring him that everything was fine. However, the motorcyclist noticed that the woman appeared motionless, possibly unconscious, and he found the situation unsettling. He reported it, but received no further updates on Michelle's case until 2009. In 2015, he was summoned to the police station for identification purposes, and Dallas identified Kevin Williams from a photograph as the individual he had seen near Michelle's car that fateful night. Exactly 2 months had passed since Kevin's wife, who had previously provided him with an alibi for that particular evening, left him and claimed that he was not with her at the time. Mark's statements shed light on many unanswered questions surrounding that night, particularly why Michelle abruptly stopped just 2 kilometers away from her home on the highway. Additionally, if Kevin managed to escape to the trailer park after the murder, it is plausible that Mark could have returned to the crime scene to assist his friend, which has always raised suspicions. However, there is a crucial detail. None of Michelle's friends ever heard her mention dating Kevin. He was not mentioned in her diary, where she meticulously documented all her relationships. Instead, Michelle confided in her friends about finding Mark Abbott attractive. Yet, a complication arises as there are 2 individuals named Mark and Matt who happen to be twins. The sheriff is still unaware of which one reported the murder to the station and which one returned to the crime scene. Therefore, the motive behind Michelle's death could be her involvement with Mark and her disclosure of her condition to him, or it could be her discovery of the Abbott family's deep involvement in the illicit drug trade. Even a friend of the Abbott family, who owns a gun store, overheard Mark mentioning that he took care of the scumbag. However, due to the numerous errors made by inexperienced assistants to Sheriff Benton, uncovering the truth will prove to be a daunting task. Essentially, Kevin will assert that Mark is the killer, while Mark will insist that Kevin is the culprit. The fact that they openly make these claims suggests a sense of invincibility. A Upon analyzing the progress of the investigation into this case, one can argue that the killer would not have evaded justice anywhere else but in Benton. As for Joshua, following his release, he pursued legal action and was awarded $4 million, $10,000 of which he donated to the sheriff's office to aid in capturing the true murderer of Michelle. He states that the investigation is in progress and there could be an imminent arrest of one or more suspects. Furthermore, he firmly believes that being wrongly accused of Michelle's murder was not a mere coincidence. His persistent nature has always defined him, and it is precisely this quality that will drive him to persist in pursuing this case until its conclusion. Tanya Hughes was a force of nature. She had the kind of presence that made people stop and take notice. She was the life of the party, the one who could make a room full of strangers feel like old friends. She had an easy, infectious laugh and a way of making people feel like they belonged. Her friends called her a firecracker, full of energy, full of light. Growing up in a small town in Florida, Tanya was deeply loved by her family. She was the youngest of three and the only girl, which meant she was fiercely protected by her two older brothers. Her parents, Ruth and James, adored her. She had a passion for dancing, ballet, jazz, even a little tap. She dreamed of performing on the big stage, captivating audiences with her grace and charm. She was an excellent student, sharp-witted and outgoing, the kind of girl who could talk her way out of anything. But life had other plans for Tanya, plans that would take her far away from the future she had imagined. On the morning of January 1st, 1985, a motorist driving along a desolate road outside of Tampa spotted something in the ditch. At first, he thought it was trash, maybe an old bag or some discarded clothing. But as he got closer, his stomach dropped. It wasn't trash, it was a person. The police arrived at the scene quickly. Lying there, lifeless and abandoned, was 20-year-old Tanya Hughes. She was missing her shoes. Her clothes were torn and covered in dirt. A blue towel lay crumpled beside her, stained with blood. It looked like she had been dumped like garbage, tossed aside without a second thought. The officers immediately knew they were dealing with a homicide, but there were more questions than answers. Who would do this to someone like Tanya? Why? And perhaps most importantly, how did she get here? For Tanya's family, the news was unbearable. Ruth, her mother, collapsed when she got the call. Her father, James, sat in silence for hours, staring at the floor. Her brothers, normally so protective of their little sister, felt helpless. They had always believed they could shield her from harm. Now she is gone. Her funeral was packed. Friends, family, even people who had only met her once or twice showed up to say their goodbyes. The pain in the room was overwhelming. There were no answers, only grief. And as the months passed, grief turned into frustration. The police had little to go on, no eyewitnesses, no clear suspects, no DNA technology like today. The case that should have been solved quickly was now growing colder by the day. Years passed. Then decades. Tanya's name faded from the headlines, but her family never forgot. They held on to hope, praying that one day, somehow, the truth would come out. Then, in 2020, 35 years after Tanya's murder, a breakthrough finally came. A DNA match. A name. A suspect who had been living his life as though nothing had ever happened. A man named Daniel Wells. Wells had spent decades hiding in plain sight. He had a job, friends, a routine. He was just an ordinary man, at least, that's what people thought. But on March 18th, 2020, his past caught up to him. It was just after noon when officers pulled him over as he was leaving work. The two detectives posing as patrol officers kept it casual, pretending it was just a routine stop. Then another officer approached and said, "Hey, we have something we want to talk to you about at the police station. Will you come with us?" Wells didn't resist. He stepped out of his truck, towering at 6 feet 7 inches, a giant of a man. His face was unreadable. He had no idea that this was the last day he would ever walk as a free man. Back at the police station, the interrogation was tense. The detectives knew they had to be careful. They had waited decades for this moment. Wells sat across from them, calm at first, denying everything. But the investigators weren't backing down. They had the evidence. They had his DNA from the crime scene. There was no way out. And then, after hours of questioning, Daniel Wells finally broke. He confessed. The room was silent for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. 35 years. 35 years of waiting, of not knowing, of wondering if the truth would ever come to light. And now, here it was. The trial moved quickly. The evidence was undeniable. Wells was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He showed no emotion as the judge read his fate. His family was in shock, his sister, his co-workers. They had never suspected a thing. For Tanya's family, justice had finally come, but it didn't erase the pain. Ruth, her mother, said through tears, "We spent our lives wondering if we would ever know the truth. Now, we do. But it still hurts." Daniel Wells was sent to Florida State Prison, where he will spend the rest of his days behind bars. Tanya Hughes was finally at peace. It took 35 years, but justice had been served. Her story is a reminder that no case is ever truly forgotten, that no matter how much time passes, the truth has a way of finding its way to the surface. And for those who wait for justice, the wait may be long, but it is never in vain. Tanya Hughes' story is a tragic reminder that justice, no matter how delayed, must always be pursued. But for every case that gets solved, there are thousands of families still waiting for answers, still hoping that someone will come forward with the truth. If you have any information about a cold case, no matter how small, speak up. One tip, one memory, one detail could be the key to bringing justice to another family still living in the dark. Support organizations that fight for victims, push for advancements in forensic science, and never forget that behind every cold case is a family that refuses to give up. Justice may take time, but the truth will always matter.